A game designer is charged with an aesthetic imperative. In a game, the aesthetics of a simulation and of a dramatic story are suspected to be deeply coupled in conflict, choice, and change. Using the mechanics, dynamics, aesthetics framework, we will isolate the story channels of the simulation to survey practical problems encountered when designing a game, including dramatic elements of players' choice, conflict, and change. My name is Ryan Wianco, and this is Industry Broadcast. Before cracking open this insightful piece today, I got to give a big thanks out to Mr. Ethan Kennelly for taking the time and effort to write it. Reminding all of our listeners that his blog can be found at www.finegamedesign.com. In the game board of tic-tac-toe, how many moves does the user have? The player of X only has one move, but the user has at least one more option. She can quit playing. In fact, on every turn, the user has always the option to quit playing. While game theory usually has no need to consider this alternative, quitting play is the ultimate problem that game designers face. In non-interactive entertainment, such as a dramatic movie, the audience too has the option of physically leaving or mentally excursioning on a daydream. Along the lines of decision theory, the user is trying to satisfy an aesthetic preference for entertainment over boredom. The user not only has a choice of moves to make in the game, but also may choose, when none of the moves promise to be entertaining, to quit playing and seek entertainment elsewhere. If the system requirements and the user requirements have been met, then the game has failed to entertain. Out of all of the options available to the user, the game has ceased to be the most engaging. Perhaps the game session engendered frustration, or as in tic-tac-toe, boredom. As a designer in need, I cannot claim competence for a solution here. Instead, this survey is intended to promote collaboration between designers and theorists. The tic-tac-toe user's boredom is derived from having solved the problem posed by the simulation dynamics. In the tic-tac-toe example above, it does not matter whether the piece of the user's interfaces are ergonomic, or whether the endgame cinematic has an epic look and feel. To facilitate this distinction when analyzing the design of a game, over the past few years I have found it helpful to partition the game design into 4 channels: simulation, user interface, story, and look and feel. Of these two, simulation and story are inferred, while user interface and look and feel are perceived. Here is a brief definition and example of each channel using the ancient Chinese board game Go. The simulation, the abstract rules governing play. In Go simulation, a new stone's position may not be in an occupied cell. User interface, the input controls and the output representation to the human players, abstracted from any fine art. In Go's user interface, there is an orthogonal grid and several black and white markers intended to be placed on the intersections. Story, the premise, characters, and plot that the user is internally narrating. In Go's story, a group is alive or dead and may be attacked or defended. Look and feel, the sensorial style and artistry, such as stylistic qualities of visual, oral, and tactile senses. In the look and feel of a fine Go set, the board is thick and made of golden kaya-wood, and the black stones are slate and white are clamshell, with faint wavy lines on one side. In a matter somewhat similar to Jesse James Garrett's dual representation of interface and information, all 4 channels contribute to the user's experience. Analyzing a game into these channels isolates phenomena under discussion and invites a multidisciplinary analysis of games, which leverages the decades to centuries of expertise in discrete mathematics, ergonomics, dramatic writing, and the sensorial arts. Design discovers a consonance among the channels. In this article, only the channels of simulation and story will be discussed because of the wealth of prior theoretical work. By a dual analysis of simulation and story channels, we will see that channel consonance is a co-requisite to entertainment. Here is an example of simulation and story consonance. At DigiPen, a team of students created their senior project, Narbacular Drop. In the premise of its story, Princess Nonis escapes a devious dungeon. In the salient feature of its simulation, the avatar maps space on arbitrarily placed portals to advance through puzzles. The simulation and story compatibility is slightly dissonant, and the user's belief is stretched to accept the princess that shoots teleporters. In the follow-up, Portal, the salient feature of the simulation is the same, but Portal's premises of its story, a human test subject completes a robotic lab's training. The story's premise on the science fiction laboratory fits better with the simulation mechanic of space warp puzzles. So the simulation and story channels are interdependent, and in the case of portals, they are consonant. Designers who must combine simulation and story would benefit from a model that unifies the aesthetics of a game's simulation and story. Aesthetic requirements. In 2005, Gregor Benedetti had evoked a fearful look and feel in Hero Card Nightmare, but the simulation and story channels of the game were not evolving with a constant set of tension and fear, so the project was cancelled. Hating to see the evocative art and components go to waste, I proposed a redesign of the simulation and story channels. While preserving the user interface and look and feel channels, Benedetti's horrific look and feel set an aesthetic requirement of fear and suspense. I faced the practical problem. What simulation and story dynamics heighten tension and induce an entertaining form of fear? Because the general problem of correlating a user's emotional response to a game's simulation mechanics is germane to game design, Marc LeBlanc proposed partitioning the design into mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. Following each definition is an example in the simulation channel and story channel of Go. Mechanics. The rules and assets of the game, as an artifact of development. In Go's simulation mechanics, if a contiguous set of stones has no empty neighbors, then that set of stones is eliminated. In Go's story mechanics, if a group loses all of its liberties, the group is killed. Dynamics. The game session created from the execution of the mechanics and its interaction with users. In Go's simulation dynamics, suppose that during play, a maximal connected number set of stones has only one empty neighbor, and so might be eliminated during the next move. In Go's story dynamics, her dumpling is about to be eaten. Aesthetics. The emotional experiences by users. In Go's simulation aesthetics, suppose a player is worried about diminishing their points by the count of stones eliminated. In Go's story aesthetics, suppose a player is indignant at having her dumpling eaten. The overview suggests a functional relationship. Mechanics influence dynamics, which influence aesthetics. The users have unique beliefs and preferences. For that reason, designers empathize with their user and aim to understand the user's aesthetic preferences, even when the user does not understand them themselves. Aesthetics have long been a domain of interest among dramatists. Egri restates a classic model of aesthetic requirements as a drama's subjective experience, which consists of a rising action, climax, and conclusion. In a dramatic story, Egri posits that the aesthetics correlate to the dramatics of the story. Let us look at the story dynamics and consider their possible confluences with simulation dynamics. Dynamics of simulation and story. Egri explains the dynamics of drama by fundamentals, often referred to as character, conflict, choice, and change. Due to the broad scope of media and the attention to psychology of motivation, I will adapt Egri's concepts to games. Personality and objective make a character more interesting. In God of War, the bloodlust of Kratos elicits an emotional response, albeit immature and for a juvenile aesthetic profile. The characters in a drama are pitted in conflict. In Half-Life, Gordon's lab is invaded by aliens. In Ico, Ico and Yorda are trapped in a castle and pursued by shadows. The choices made by the characters drive their story. Gordon Freeman explores an alien-infested laboratory. Ico escapes a demonic castle. The result of the choice that the character makes changes the values and beliefs of that character, in narratives and in games. The psychology of Macbeth changes from loyal to murderous. The isolation of Ico from Yorda reveals his and the target user's need for companionship. To elevate tension, writers sometimes employ dynamics of risk to craft the character's options into a dilemma. The greatest such dilemma in a story is the crisis. In the Season 1 finale of the television drama Heroes, Peter and Nathan Petrelli face the crisis of destroying New York or committing seeming suicide. Let us apply these dramatic terms to the simulation. Representing a simulation session as a dramatic story. Sid Meier's most popular game, Civilization, emphasizes the aesthetics of the simulation channel. In the management of an empire, the user is often considering the dynamics of the simulation as a series of interesting choices. Part of the interest in a choice is due to the risk and return. The user risks his or her resources or chances of winning in exchange for the prospect of greater resources. Here is a modified example from Super Mario Bros. At the beginning of World 5-1, the user may take a low-risk option of destroying a Koopa Troopa by fireball, or performing the high-risk maneuver of jumping on top and then kicking the turtle shell to hit several enemies into a combo. If the user's timing or trajectory is mistaken, then the avatar might lose a life to the Koopa Troopa. To compensate for the higher risk, expert execution yields an extra life. So, with sufficient skill, the risk of loss is offset by the gain. For another example, in Rainer's Knizia two-player card game Lost Cities, before pursuing an expedition, a player may play an investment card. The investment card multiplies the points of the expedition, which may turn out to be negative or positive. Correlating the simulation dynamics of risk and return to the aesthetic experience of play, such as excitement, would refine the design of simulation mechanics. Part of the interest in a choice is due to the drama. Marc LeBlanc applies the aesthetics of a dramatic arc to a card game, Magic the Gathering. During the opening game, players have few resources, so the intensity of conflict is relatively low. The players draw resources for attacking and defending through mechanics that conform to a producer-consumer pattern. Thereby the uncertainty and inevitability increase until it is obvious which player will win. Then tension diminishes. Likewise in Go, Poker, StarCraft, and Civilization, resources are produced over time through producer-consumer mechanics. For target users of these kinds of games, the dynamics of risk emerging from such mechanics often induce an aesthetic experience that adheres to a dramatic arc. Modeling a dramatic story as a simulation session. The requirement of rational agents with perfect knowledge is incompatible with storytelling. From Shakespeare to soap opera, drama is about characters with imperfect intellects. Addressing this, Lowe and Paquet formally model mistaken beliefs and preferences in a dramatic story. In their analysis of an example story, they represent the characters as players in a formal game, who make choices that lead to conflict and whose conclusion changes the beliefs of at least one of those characters. This model elucidates a fundamental connection between the concepts and channels of story and simulation. If their techniques could be adapted to model the aesthetic consequences of changes in belief, then it might help integrate the design of a game simulation and story. Although a game's drama cannot be reduced to a narrative, and the emotions of video games differ from those of cinema, the simulation and story share similar characters, conflict, choice, and change. Egri analyzes dramatic conflict as opponents attacking and counterattacking. Lowe and Paquet analyze a story as tactical scheming, modeling the player of a game in Egri's dramatic terms and Lowe and Paquet's terms of belief. It is reasonable to conjecture that the player, facing a conflict, makes the main character's choices, and through the conclusion of the most difficult choice, that being the crisis, experiences a change in values or beliefs. To develop this hypothesis, let us discuss some special cases. Drama, correlating dynamics to aesthetics. Conflict is crafted by balancing player skill and scenario challenge. By design, the difficulty and risk of problems with similar solution, which Ainu and Ushijima call a gimmick, is ramped. In Super Mario Bros., the gimmick of a cliff is iterated in 4 stages, so the user may remember, practice, apply, and master that gimmick. In their example, a cliff is leapt from 4 times. First with a ground below, second without, third with a performance elevation on a flagpole, and fourth with a moving platform. Designers sequence the difficulty and risk to teach an essential skill of play while developing a dramatic arc, derived from challenging the player. This design task would benefit from a theoretical relationship between challenge construction, skill acquisition, and the aesthetics of drama. One special case of the dramatic conflict has been formalized in deterministic turn-based games of perfect information. In combinatorial game theory, the heat of a game state correlates to the simulation dynamics to the urgency of making a choice. In Go, this is often a situation when one or both players can claim initiative, such as during a co-fight. It would be interesting to investigate whether the combinatorial game theoretical heat of a simulation state correlates to the aesthetic experience of its users. In the dynamics of a simulation channel, there have been several mathematical analyses, some of which could be suspected to have correlations to the aesthetic quality of a game's users. For instance, chess has too many draws at a championship level. An extremal case of this trend is tic-tac-toe, or any other game that a player has solved. The result of every session is predictable, and therefore changes no beliefs. A video game can induce a sudden change in beliefs that result in surprise. Emiliano Lorini and Cristiano Castelfranchi have formally modeled surprise as an epistemic change. While their model is beyond my comprehension if it is compatible with the simulation dynamics of a game that modifies player belief, its epistemic model of surprise would offer a special case solution to the problem of correlating simulation dynamics to aesthetics. For some classes of game simulation, some parts of the dynamics have been formalized. To give Hero Card Nightmare a simulation dynamics induced sense of suspense and fear, I inverted the salient simulation mechanics of Clue. In Nightmare's simulation channel, you begin with a deal of cards, then when discovered, eliminates you from the game. In the story channel, you are shown a photograph of where you will die. You're dealt scene card, and who will kill you. You're dealt killer card. Together, these simulation and story mechanics induce dynamics of bluffing correlating to aesthetics of fear. Probability of discovery increases during play, increasing fear, while disseminating disinformation may mislead players, incentivizing bluffing. Moving someone else's killer pawn away might deceive other players into misidentifying your actual killer. I have intuitively derived and empirically tested correlations of Nightmare simulation dynamics to the aesthetics of its user experience. What I did not have was a theory of knowledge games. Hans P. Ditchmarsh modeled the salient mechanics of Clue, or Cluedo, as a knowledge game, in which players are dealt cards and winning consists of knowing the deal of cards. In doing so, there is a formal model of dynamics of play. If the theory of knowledge games could be extended to model correlations to a user's aesthetic experience, then the aesthetics of a game like Clue could be discussed analytically. In both the dynamics of a simulation channel and a story channel of some dramatic games, choice reveals character and advances the conflict towards a conclusion. In a model like Low and Paquet's, a model reveals information of a player's preferences, and therefore adjusts the beliefs of observers. The actions of a player in Clue, Poker, or Go reveals the aspects of the strategy and the belief of the active player. This applies to many genres of games. It is hard to imagine a satisfying simulation channel in which the enthusiastic player does not have some belief about the simulation dynamics or about another player altered through the course of play. Seeing a newly dealt card in 7-card stud poker or Lost Cities changes belief on the strength of one's hand. This change in belief may alter tactics. Discovering a weakness in one's wall of stones in Go may stimulate the player to protect the weakness before it is exploited. Such cases of play often induce excitement among users. It would be a boon to designers if the dynamics of belief change, such as the work of Ditchmarsh, Lorini, and Castelfranchi, could be adapted to model a user's emotional state. Conclusions. A player in a simulation channel and a character in the story channel changes or reveals preferences. The player character can be jointly analyzed as a simulation story. For instance, Aiko's and the user's preferences for companionship are revealed when Yoda is lost. Lowe and Paquette have taken steps to model the revelations of preferences in their simulational story. This article has not formalized techniques which are beyond the author's competence. Instead, I have focused in on problems that designers face without theoretical tools. Centuries ago, Cardano, Pascal, and Fermat formalized the analysis of simulation mechanics in games of chance, clarifying the design of countless dice and card game mechanics to follow. Even if the simulation and story problems are not solvable, partial solutions would advance the art of crafting games that satisfy our aesthetic requirements. Acknowledgments. Thanks to Benedict Lowe, whose primary discussion inspired this paper and informed the recent work on the formal analyses of games and stories. Thanks to the anonymous references for their detailed comments, which have eliminated numerous errors and digressions. The remaining are all my fault. If you know of discoveries along the lines investigated herein, I would appreciate and acknowledge your bringing them to my attention. And this wraps up another fine article from Mr. Ethan Kennerly titled Open Problems in Simulation and Story Analyses. A reminder that Ethan's blog can be found at www.finegamedesign.com. And this is me, Ryan Wienko, signing off from yet another attempt to bring the collective insight of the gaming industry to your ears, only at industrybroadcast.com.